It's nice to meet you. My name is History Whispers ASMR. I hope you're doing well. This is my first video showing my face and creating some hopefully good content and good quality content. I'm not used to being on camera, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little bit shy. Today, as my first video, I would like to talk about a little bit about what this channel will hopefully grow into over the time I put into it. You'll also have to forgive me, I have a little bit of a script because this topic I would like to discuss today is what on earth is history? Well, history is many things, or it can be many things, as it has been argued by many academics. History can simply be understood as the past, but arguments, as suggested by academics, say that history is in fact our interpretations of the past rather than the past itself. But history can also be argued to be what we know of the past, what we have learned about the past through factual information. But more importantly, it's the stories that make history so wonderful and is a fundamental reason why I chose to pursue history as a university degree. So, firstly, a little bit about myself and this channel. I recently graduated with a degree in history from a British university. I studied various periods of history ranging from early modern to Middle Ages to the more modern, even fairly more recent history around, for example, the UN, the United Nations, and the War on Terror. My thesis was on British history, on a very infamous character of history whom you might actually recognise as Henry VIII. What I would like to do with this channel is potentially have very informative, educational chats or discussions with you about history. I feel that history is something we can all enjoy and learn from. I would like to make this more fun than it sounds currently. This video will probably be very boring, which is why it will put you to sleep, which is good for ASMR, of course, and the tingles. Today's video is, as I've said, about what on earth is history, and I've discussed a little bit about that. Future videos will be less philosophical. They'll be more informative, looking at different people, different stories, the stories of history, rather than having a massive philosophical debate. philosophical debate every time I create a video. But more importantly, I want this to be accessible to anybody who wants to subscribe to my channel. I want this to be a safe space for us to discuss history, to discuss topics that we might want to hear about or learn about, and as a means of discussing about history, or perhaps even indoctrinating people into enjoying history with me. The reason I chose to do this as an ASMR channel is I found ASMR last year when I suffered with a lot of anxiety, and I found that listening to ASMR actually really helped me to sleep and to relax. And I thought, hey, why not show my love and my passion for history? Because I'm sure there are people out there who would enjoy it. So let's get on with today's video. As I've said, I have a little script here, so I don't go off-piste. That's a nice word. Piste. Go off-piste. That's quite a tingly word. I quite like that one. So, the first thing I'd like to actually talk about is how do we describe history? And I mentioned about how we describe history as the past, but history is so much more than that. When we see how history has developed over time, there are quite a few notable changes to the subject that are quite academic, and this isn't something that your typical high school or secondary school history teacher will tell you about, but some of you may have come across the term historiography. Historiography, which is defined as everything that we write about history, how we interpret history in the past specifically, and how that has changed shapes how academically people view history on the academic stage. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of history, but before I do that, I want to explain a little bit, or describe perhaps the trends and patterns of history writing and doing history across the ages. Now, I think everyone is aware of ancient mythology. So, ancient Greek mythology is a particularly popular one, as well as the Egyptians. I would argue not so much the Romans, because everybody is far too interested in Egyptian mythology and Greek mythology to care about the Romans. Poor Romans. So we have the ancient tales of Heracles, or Hercules as he's more commonly known, the Greek gods Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, the Titans, Kronos. We have lots of information and stories about gods. For example, Anubis, Horus, Ra, Isis, Osiris, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus. Everybody laughs at Uranus, poor Uranus. I'm only jesting, of course. honest, I think we're all a bit skeptical of Pegasus existing. Giant gods wrecking the earth out of anger. Great lineages coming from one god. Zeus, in particular, is a fine example. So, myth and history aren't so much intertwined with one another as I think they should be, because it is a story about the past and it pertains to culture, and culture is a very important part of understanding our past. So this was the ancient periods with mythology. We then move to someone who is referred to as the father of history, and his name is Herodotus. Of his. Simply titled The Histories. Now, excuse me. Herodotus, my old friend Herodotus, is known for creating the world's first real historical saga that held any meaning. He began to use what we now know as primary sources. Now, a primary source is a piece of material that is accurate about the past and was written in the past. So, for example, I might be writing a essay, for example, on Japanese women, and in the 1930s, that's quite an interesting topic, or geishas in the 1930s in Japan. And to do that, you need to consult primary sources. So I would then perhaps look at women's diaries in Japan during the 30s, and this is a primary source. It's something that is written or created or made at the time that you are looking into. And Herodotus was the first real historian to ever do this. Now, particularly in the histories, he talks about the great men. He talks about the actions and characters of men. So you for example, mythology, we've got Sparta and Leonidas and 300. The kind of actions that were epic for humanity, that were colossal, almost the achievements of great men. But then, during the Middle Ages and medieval period, we had the emergence of historians such as Bede, who wrote both an ecclesiastical and secular account of British history during the Middle Ages. Now, to do so in a period where religion dominates is quite remarkable. To create a secular account which isn't dominated by the religion. In fact, this is pretty spectacular. In his accounts, he uses the accounts of various monks across England to direct his analysis and history. So we're moving away from more of a myth storytelling aspect to quite more nuanced writings of history. It's really synthesized accounts of the past. So then we come to the Enlightenment period with David Hume and Edward Gibbon. It's another example, as well as as Voltaire. Now they changed the game of writing history. They particularly focused on economic and political histories, but also included art and literature and culture as a means of primary resources. However, there is still discussion on what history should be about, and from Herodotus, the actions and characters of men, we've moved to a more, perhaps a wider discussion of history and what constitutes as history. In the 19th century we saw von Ranke, and he really drilled into the notion of primary sources and having a reliance on primary sources to tell an objective past. And the objectivity argument is very difficult and is still argued as to whether, and debated as to whether it is actually possible to achieve an objective history. But I'll come to that at the end. Von Ranke also discussed politics, diplomacy and war, so again it brought up this argument of what should be discussed in history. But it comes to a head in the 20th century with the Annales School. Now the Annales School considered the long term of micro-history based on geography. Now that sounds pretty hardcore, so I'll break that down a little bit. For example, Marc Bloch and Francois Chevalier wrote various micro-histories about specific places with specific geographic locations, and I can't for the life of me, off the top of my head, give an example. But if you type in the Annales School, it'll come up with a lot of information. They believed on focusing on a specific region and creating a large stretch of history just for that one place, which is very interesting, considering that today we have vast amounts of popular histories which cover swaths of history. For example, an example would be a short history of Tudor England by E.H. Carr. That's an example. I think it's E.H. Carr. I hope it's E.H. Carr. Otherwise I've just made myself look very stupid. But then another section that came out of the 20th century was Marxism, with the rise of communism in Europe and Asia. Marxism came to a head in historiography also, especially with E.P. Thompson, a British historian who wrote about the working class and the making of the English working class, the making of an English working class and the revolution, essentially. He specified history should be about ordinary people, the layman. So everyday people, which honestly you can't disagree with. It's important to discuss history from below, so to speak. So history has developed from being about a story, an ancient story, about one god sleeping with another god, and then lots of demigods exist, there's lots of issues, or the creation of mankind, to this analysis and interpretation of primary sources to construct our own past, and how it differentiates between historians, because no historian agrees with each other, or it's very rare. There's always a disagreement about something. So history is always developing. It's forever developing, actually. And I think it will continue to develop with the growth of mankind. We see how we grow as humans with our technology, and history develops with it. That's a pretty straightforward fact, really. So, let's have some conclusions. So, in my opinion, the nature and purpose of history is different for everyone. Your opinion of what history is going to be different to my opinion, but for me, it's about stories. That's what always captivated me as a child. It was about sitting on my I remember, it's quite nostalgic, sitting on my grandfather's lap and him telling me stories about the war, or how he served in the RAF. It's learning where we came from, and that has a very personal aspect to it. We all have a past, and we all want to learn about the past. So that it may sound a bit whimsical, but we can learn from the past. So we can teach ourselves to not make the same mistakes over and over again. It does sound a bit far-fetched, I must admit, but it's true. We look at the past as an example and try and better ourselves from it. I think without the past and without history, where would we be? Would we learn anything? Probably not. Would we continue to make the same mistakes? Yes. If we don't look at history, we see the same mistakes cropping up again. And I'm not going to get political, but Donald Trump is another fine example of history being ignored. You may disagree with me, and that's perfectly fine. And I enjoy history. It's fun. We love to hear stories. We love hearing about our own pasts and the pasts of other people. And history can be big or small. It doesn't really matter. The size of history is irrelevant, but its impact on our lives is ginormous. It's almost, you can't even measure the impact of history on humanity. It's immeasurable, which is quite incredible. So, if you have any comments about today's discussion, I would love to hear them. Please don't drill me for being a bit anti-Trump. I have no opinion on Trump anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Before I finish off, I would like to discuss a little bit about objectivity in history, whether it's true or not. And I think the fact that I made that comment on Trump is quite relevant to that. I was being subjective, and history is about being as objective as you physically can be. And it's very difficult when you have your own personal views, your own personal opinions, or when you're trying to discredit somebody else. Historiography, so to speak, is an attempt to discover the past, but it's constantly discredited by others. Can history, who knows? I think it's something is always covered up with prejudice and our own prejudices. For example, I'm equally biased and prejudiced, and I can completely admit that. But it doesn't stop history from being fun, or relevant, or important. History is very important, and I think that's ultimately the message I'm trying to put across. History is important, and we love to learn about it. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope this has given you something to relax to, and I hope you're feeling very chilled and tingled out. If you would like to comment below some histories that you'd like me to research and talk about, then I'm more than happy to hear those comments. If you have any comments about my ASMR, what kinds of sounds you like, then I'm equally happy to hear about those too. Thank you very much for watching.